Hi, everybody. Welcome. I am Joe Posnanski, and we are. This is going to be really fun. Earlier this month we announced a new thing at JoeBlogs where we are giving out. We are naming a JoeBlogs Book of the Month, and we started this month here in June. With my friend Tommy Tomlinson's book, Dogland. And we have Tommy Tomlinson here with us today. Hey, Tommy.
Hey, how's it going, man?
It is going great. We have known each other. How many years have we known each other, Tommy?
117 years, I think.
173 years.
Yeah,
we it's met just before the Civil War.
Yeah, it was in those early days when people were trying to decide which side they wanted to be on.
Yes.
And we, obviously chose the right path and others didn't. And, we still have some hard feelings over that. But
yeah, we do.
And I remember throwing a baseball around with you before baseball was even invented.
In fact, we invented baseball.
We certainly have just as good a claim as Abner Doubleday does.
Yes. We do. So Tommy wrote this wonderful book called Dogland. And what's the full title? Because on the paperback, you've got just Dogland, which is the title. But in the hardcover, it has like a whole subtitle.
It's passion, glory, and lots of slobber at the Westminster Dog Show.
Yes. Now, is that still? I don't know how this works. Is that officially still the subtitle, or once the paperback comes out, it just becomes Dogland?
That's a good question. I don't know. It's not on the paperback cover. Let me look and see if it's inside.
Yeah, I wonder if it's.
I haven't had a copy. It is.
Oh,
yeah, there
okay.
it is.
Show everybody. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Passion, glory, and lots of slobber at the Westminster Dog Show.
And so, I guess it is still the official full title there. But we decided for the paperback just to kind of go minimalist.
Yeah.
And went with a picture of
look at that.
Stryker, who's the kind of the protagonist, I guess, of this book.
He's the dog.
He's the dog hero, yes, of this book. And so we decided to just go with that cover.
So here was the thing that we've talked about. We've already we've already announced the book. A bunch of people have bought it. People are having conversations about it, which is really cool. And here's what I love about it, because I love this book. I've loved it from the beginning. I loved it before it even came out. We've spent time talking about it. It feels to me like this book is two things, okay? And the hardcover, honestly, I think really leaned into the first thing that it is, which is it is a very funny but heartfelt look at dog shows, Westminster specifically, but it does talk about other dog shows. This weird, funny, interesting culture that is dog shows, and that is sort of track one. Track two, which I think the paperback leans a little bit more into, just by design, obviously it's the same book, is that it's really about our relationship with dogs. And it really is about us as people loving our dogs. The driving question, which you'll talk about here in a minute, of the book, are our dogs happy? Specifically, that was a specific pointed toward Westminster, but it's a larger question. Are dogs happy, and our connections to them? So when you thought about that, because it is two tracks, did you think about them equally? Did you really see this as more of one than the other? Because it's so hard to get our messages out there, right? When we write a book, what it's about. What did you see this book being?
Well, at the beginning, when I first thought about it, I just thought about dog shows, and I thought there'd be an interesting look at. I'd seen the movie Best in Show like lots of other people,
right?
And I kind of wondered about that world in a nonfiction sort of way. But then the more I thought about it, and I always like anything I do, anything I write, to be about something on the surface and then something a little deeper.
Yeah.
And so the surface of this book is kind of about dog shows and what that world's like. But the deeper picture is, like you said, about that relationship that we've had with dogs that goes back scientists are guessing around 30,000 years.
Yeah.
We're the first animal they are the first animal we ever domesticated. And so there's that. And then even on a deeper level, I like to think about like one word or one thought that I want the entire book to sort of be about.
Yeah.
And I kind of came around this idea of happiness. Like, what makes dogs happy? Why are they happy or not happy? And then because they are so linked to us, what makes us happy, and how have dogs figured out how to make us happy?
Yeah.
And so those, with each step into the book, I hope you get a little bit deeper into those, away from those sort of more surface thoughts of kind of what's the dog show world like, into that sort of thing about what's that relationship with dogs that we have? Why is it so meaningful? And what does it say to us about sort of what happiness is?
Yeah. Yeah. I think if you read the book, you totally get it. And it fits such a perfect, to give you an example. So we announced that this was the book of the month, just a couple of weeks ago. And people have bought the book. They've really had a lot of fun discussing it on the JoeBlogs Discord and other places. And almost immediately, the JoeBlogs Discord channel became, let me show you a picture of my dog.
Oh,
right?
Of course.
It's just a bunch of pictures of
Yes.
dogs, which, of course, nothing makes you happier than just seeing a whole bunch of pictures of people's dogs and hearing stories about them. But that's really because I think that's the universal part of what this book is. And I've always thought it was very clever of the way that you really, and this is what you always do in all of your writing. You take something that on the surface is one thing, which is dog shows. There are not that many people interested in dog shows. And we all watch it like on Thanksgiving or whatever. And we've all, a lot of us have seen Best in Show, and it's hilarious and wonderful. But it's really when you dive into this book and you really see that, the stuff that you are talking about with dog shows is very specific to the relationship we have with these dogs. And it's very funny, the way that they dress up these dogs, the way that they, you talk, I'd love to hear you talk again about just the hair products that these people use. It's incredible.
Yeah, they, a show dog, gets groomed for 2 or 3 hours a day, while they're in the shows.
Like Cher,
except, much more important, of course, right? Cher probably has a wig. It's the boy, these dogs don't have wigs. And so, just the amount of time and effort that goes into like preparing these dogs for what ends up being at best, like an hour in the show ring.
Yeah.
Is just astounding. Not to mention, that's just like the day of the show.
Yeah.
Where they're grooming, not to mention all the like training and stuff that goes in beforehand. So it's just like this, it's very much like, I came to think of it as like the Olympics, where a gymnast might train for like 10 years to do a floor exercise that lasts like 3 minutes.
Right.
Or whatever. It's that same kind of, way, way out of proportion time and effort to the actual moment itself. And so and people who have regular dogs put a lot of that time and effort into their dogs too, not necessarily with the same level of grooming, but the time they spend on them, the money they spend on them, all that sort of thing. It's people are very devoted to their dogs. And I think it gets at, again, on the deeper level, what dogs mean to them, and that sort of access point that dogs give us to a sort of pure joy and happiness that I think is hard to find in a lot of other ways in life.
Well, it's like the Olympics image is perfect in this way. These are these are the best of the best, right? These are dogs that have been training forever. They're groomed incredibly well. But we've all been over to a friend's house who wants to tell you, oh, let me show you what I just taught my dog, right?
Right.
Like sit, and the dog will not sit. And they'll just spend hours and hours trying to get the dog to do one trick that they can just share with all of their friends, right?
Right.
Which is very funny because we've done it. You've done it. We've done
Sure.
it with our dog Wesley. We're like, oh, watch this, and never done. Which is why the Olympics is such a good image. It's sort of like, hey, watch my kid swim in the local meet. That's all well and good. That has nothing to do with what Michael Phelps and Katie Ledecky are doing, right?
Right. Yeah, and so I think it's all, what dogs do for us is sort of this magic trick, right? They have this way of figuring out how to make us happy, sometimes by not performing, right? When your dog doesn't do the trick that you want to do, that turns out to be hilarious in its own way.
Yes.
Right. And so dogs are kind of natural pleasers, but we have this like language barrier where they're not always sure what we want them to do, and they don't necessarily want to do it all the time. And
that happens even at the highest level, right? I mean, that happens even at these shows.
It happens in this book at a couple of key moments, and so it's this really interesting thing to think about is navigating that gap when you can communicate in some way, but you cannot. There's a barrier that's always going to be there.
Yeah,
and how do you navigate that barrier? And how do you have to figure out a lot of nonverbal cues, a lot of other things. And of course, dogs in some ways have figured this out way better than we have.
Right.
Because they can read us in many ways better than we can read them. And so that's part of it too. And part of like the magic that they perform for us is figuring out what we need sometimes before we need it.
Yeah. Well, there is a scene in the book. I do not want to ask you to tell much about the book because I think people should buy the book. And as an author, that's like I always get the, like, oh, tell me who your number one player is.
Yeah, that part of the end. Could you describe that?
Give it away. But there is a beautiful scene in this book about you kind of in a bad place. This is pretty early.
Sure.
And I do think it totally reflects because it's a dog show story, but it's not. It's a dog story.
Yeah. So I was, into the early parts of reporting for this book. I'd been doing it for a few months and I was sort of lost. Like all this stuff that you and I just talked about what the book's about and what it's going to be. I didn't understand any of that at the time. I just knew it was sort of an interesting world that I wanted to plunge into. And this happens to me a lot whenever I'm kind of starting a new story. I don't really know what it's going to be.
Sure.
And it's a new world that I'm trying to get familiar with. And I often feel sort of lost in these moments. And so this particular moment I was at the National Dog Show in Philadelphia. It's in this suburb of Philadelphia, this gigantic, just immense convention center. It's like the size of several football fields. And I'm wandering around trying to figure out what my story is and just feeling like adrift, right? And so I get to a place where there's a show ring that's not being used. And at all these show rings, they have folding chairs just set around them for spectators. And so I sit down in one of the folding chairs and I get out my notebook and I'm just trying to go through it, figure out what I've got, figure out if I've got anything, that sort of thing. And I'm doing all that and I'm really kind of down. And all of a sudden I feel this sort of like pressure underneath my left arm. And, I'm a big guy and I'm getting up there in years. And when you feel the pressure under your left arm at that age, you start to go, am I going to have a heart attack at this stupid dog show? Is this the place where it's going to end? So you had that little moment of panic. But then it just felt weird. And so I kind of looked down and underneath like the crook of my elbow, there was this giant snout that had poked through from behind. And so I slowly kind of turn around to figure out what's going on. And there's this like Bernese mountain dog, which is a huge 130-pound dog.
Yeah.
Beautiful, one of the big bruising dogs, great breed. And there's this kind of nervous looking handler holding this dog. You know, one of the things they teach you when you first get to dog shows is not to pet a dog without asking permission.
Right.
For a couple of reasons. First of all, that's just rude in general.
Yeah.
But secondly, as we said, these dogs are immaculately groomed.
Yes.
And you don't want to basically like mess up their fur. And so I didn't really know what to do. And I kind of turned around and said, is this okay? And the handler said, yeah, it's okay. We don't need to be anywhere right now. And so just for this like fairly brief moment, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, this dog like sat its snout down on my pants leg. And we just kind of sat there for a moment. You know, it was kind of breathing and I was breathing and it was quiet and all that sort of thing. And we just sort of like kind of communed silently for a little bit. And then slowly it backed its snout away, left a big trail of slime on my pants leg, and it walked away to wherever it was going. And I thought, you know, in that little moment, that's what the book was about. It's about these moments that dogs give us without us even knowing we needed them necessarily.
Yeah.
That dog was a complete stranger. Somehow it sensed in some way that it could give me something that I needed in that moment, which is what dogs do. And to try to capture as many of those moments as possible, both in the dog show world and in that wider world of our relationship with dogs, that kind of, to me, was the essence of what the book was about. That dog in that 30 seconds made me happy in a way that I really needed in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is true, I think, certainly it's true of books, but I think it's true of any kind of story, especially a story of any length at all, is a moment will come along utterly unexpected that you will just suddenly go, oh, that's what this is about. And you didn't see it coming at all. I mean, sort of I think it's part of what makes writing so exciting and so different is you could go in with one perspective. Obviously, it's not like you weren't on a completely different wavelength. You always kind of knew that this was going to be about relationships and dogs because that's what, you went in with. But it does feel like there's like that's the miracle of it, is that every now and again something will happen and you'll go, oh, wait, that's what this is about, and it's you can't count on it, right? But
right,
somehow it happens,
and you can't force it either.
Right.
Like I've done this long enough, and so have you, to know that you just have to like get to the place and kind of, and it sounds kind of woo-woo to say this, but just come in with like an open mind and an open heart.
Yes.
And just believe that if you do the work and you're there and you go in with this openness, that you will see it or it will happen.
Yeah.
Or something like that, or something will happen that will sort of guide you in the right direction. And I've, that's part of why I think what we do is so like time and labor intensive, is that you can't just walk in and expect it to happen.
Right.
In the first 30 minutes that you're there. We've both written columns for a living, deadline stuff, day to day, where you just sort of have to not make up something, but you have to work with whatever happens in that moment.
You don't have the time.
And some days it's a miracle, and some days it's not much of anything, and you got to make something anyway.
Right.
doing longer stuff gives you the luxury of wandering in and sort of being open to the moment. And then you hope you're smart enough and savvy enough that when it happens, you realize it.
That's the thing.
Yeah. And so luckily I've done this long enough where I'm like, oh, this is something here. I should just let this happen.
Yeah.
Instead of just like getting up and saying, oh, I'm sorry, or whatever. Just let the moment happen and then kind of derive some meaning from it later.
I think that is the part of writing that's very, like, people have come up to you, people have come up to me a million times. Oh, I have a book. I've got an idea for a book. I want to write a book. I want to do this. I want to do this. And you say, well, do it. Of course, you always encourage people to do it. But I think that's the hardest part to explain to people is, and I see it as two parts. The first part is the book that you want to write is not the book you will write, right? Like for better or for worse, like the image you have in your mind of what that book is not what will end up on the page. Whether hopefully what ends up on the page is fuller and deeper or whatever, but sometimes it's just not as good as what you've done. So, but the second thing is exactly that. You have to sometimes you go 50 days getting nothing. And then the 51st day, something like that happens and you recognize it and say, oh, you know what? And that means it's not like those first 50 days were wasted. You needed those first 50 days to get to that 51st day, I think.
Yeah, it's like, I'm trying to remember who I read this from just the other day. It's very much like kind of being like a coal miner.
Yeah.
You're just like chipping away, and you go day after day after day, and all you're hitting is rock.
Right.
And then that one day you find the vein and you mine it for as long as you can until it runs out. And then you start chipping away at the rock again.
Yeah.
And so you just have to have that belief that the good stuff is in there.
Yeah.
And know that, if you keep at it, you'll get there.
Yeah.
And sometimes it happens right away and you just feel incredibly lucky. Sometimes it takes forever and you feel like it's never going to happen.
Right.
And then, like many things in life, right when you kind of give up on it is the moment that it happens.
Yeah.
And so, it's so, kind of labor intensive, not just work wise, but kind of emotionally, where you have a lot of days where you kind of get to the end of the day and you're like, what did I end up with today?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
But the only comfort I take is I'm probably a little closer to whatever I'm trying to get to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is to me such a fascinating part about what it is we do. You need, no matter how you feel about the rest of your life, as a writer, you have to have extreme confidence, right? And it's not just confidence in your ability to do it or your ability to catch it. It's confidence in your idea. Like you go in with a dog show and go, I know this is the idea. I know that there's gold here. But I don't know what it is. I don't know when I'll find it. I don't know. We all go in like we're just walking into that gold mine, coal mine, completely blind. We're completely blind. And we're like, I believe it's here. I believe the gold is here, but you don't know. So you have to have extreme confidence. And then you do have to sort of go through the emotional elements of it. And it is emotional. It's difficult to explain to people. I mean, everybody feels emotion in their jobs, right? Like there's but it's difficult to explain to people who are not writers specifically about that emotional void of, oh, I don't have anything here. And what am I?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I think you're right about confidence and how much it matters. But at the same time, day to day, I have incredible self-doubt, at the same time. I know, and at this point, I've been doing it long enough that there's a little part of my brain or psyche or whatever that knows, okay, you've done this before. You could do it again. And I'll tell you one trick that I have, and it's a cheap trick, and I hate that I have to admit to saying this, but I will go back and read stories of mine that I feel like worked.
Yeah.
And I'll say, well, okay, I did that. The same person who did that is approaching this. So surely I could pull this one off too.
Yeah.
And so, so I think that it's that mix where I do have confidence and sort of institutional knowledge at this point that I can do this stuff.
Yeah.
But in the moment every day, I'm also sort of besieged by doubt of whether it's ever going to happen. And then when you finally get to that day where it does happen or does click, it's just first of all, this astounding feeling of relief. And then that knowledge that, okay, I've got to hear, one of my favorite quote about writing, or really any creative thing, is that one from E.L. Doctorow where he said, writing is like driving at night. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can get all the way there that way.
Yeah.
And that to me is what it's about. Like you said, when I started this book, I had no idea where I was going to end up.
Right.
No idea where even, part of it would end up, but I could see just far enough ahead to know that I felt like there was a route or a path worth taking.
Yeah.
And you just have to keep going and just keep seeing a little bit further ahead until you get there.
Well, and that's what I mean by confidence, because it's basically the first day of going, I believe in this idea. And then it's a whole bunch of days going, oh, I was wrong. There is nothing here. I was totally wrong.
Do I need to give this money back that they gave me? Yeah. Yeah.
Will they let me change the idea? Cause I hate it now. But yet you kind of keep going. And I think, this book is a great example of this, because you talk about being open and doing that. I think one of the really strange parts of being a writer is that the stuff that ends up being most important is very often in the moment the stuff that feels like nothing, right? And the stuff that you think is this interview is going to change this book, right? This person, is this person's story is going to be at the heart of this book, and you think this is important, right? I mean, here's a very successful dog show dog. This is my center of my book, and this person is the trainer, and and it is important. Obviously, that's the core of the book, but it's the stuff that you just happen to see and somebody else might miss. Honestly, I mean, I guess that's the comedian thing, right? Like the great comedians see exactly what the rest of us see, but see it a little bit differently, and that's why it works. It's seeing something that does not feel important to it. Like, how many times have you written something or gone to something where somebody will say to you, the person who is involved in whatever it is you see, going, "Oh, I didn't think that was anything." Like, "Oh, really? You're interested in that? That's weird."
Yeah, there's several moments in this book that are like that.
Yeah.
And I one of them is sort of, to me, one of the key scenes of the book, which I'm not going to give away, but there's this moment that toward the end that the people involved just sort of mentioned to me in passing.
Right.
Like, this little thing happens in a couple of weeks. And I'm like, what? and by this point, and it's the difference between what you have in your head and what they have in their heads.
Yeah.
And what I have in my head, I sort of knew by that point. I've been reporting this book for a couple of years by that point, and it felt like to me like the missing puzzle piece. But of course, they're not working the same puzzle.
Right.
And so to them, it was just like, I don't care. This is just nothing. And so as soon as I heard this that this thing was going to happen, I'm like, okay, I have to be there for that.
Yeah.
And that involved kind of making some travel plans and going somewhere I wasn't expecting to go, sort of pushing back other stuff that I meant to do, and all that sort of thing to capture this moment that to them it mattered, but it was something that was very routine in their lives.
Yes.
And I knew it would not be routine in the book's life.
Yes.
And so, yeah, it is that kind of noticing things that other people may not either notice or it may not matter to them in their bigger picture.
Well, it's even in doing basic. I mean, we, as you mentioned, we both spent the bulk of our careers as daily columnists, right? And how many times, and I mean, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of times, where somebody you'll be interviewing somebody and they'll give you a quote, they'll tell you a story that they probably have told 500 times before, and they're just kind of going through the motions. And then they'll say something else. Like they think that's what matters to you. It's like, oh, you're here to talk to me about this story, right? I'm a politician and you're here to talk to me about this thing, right? And then they'll say something in a completely different context that to them means nothing. And to you is like, oh, that's the story. The whole story is there, right? And I think that's what makes for good writing, is being open to like, wow, this just went completely different direction than I thought it would.
Well, I think one thing that's been interesting to me in doing this for a living is that people are not always self-reflective, right? They don't see their lives as maybe a narrative or a story in the way that people who tell stories for a living might. And so for them, it's just like an accumulation of days and some things that's happened. Some of them mattered to them and some of them didn't. Some of them, telling somebody else's story that it may, to the person listening, seem important, but to them, it may not. And one interesting thing when I started doing this pretty regularly for a living is I would talk to people afterward that I'd written about. And they would sometimes say to me, I didn't really understand my own life until I read this story.
Yeah.
And now I understand it a little better. And that's sort of a weird thing to think about. Like you understood their lives better than they did. And that's not exactly accurate.
Right.
It's just that you saw it in a different way and they were too busy living it.
Yeah.
To try to like make a bigger sense of it.
Well,
and so that's kind of what our job is in some way.
It is, but it's a perfect segue back to the book, which is when you told people in the dog show world, oh, I'm writing a book about Westminster, I'm writing a book about dog shows, they very clearly, and I know this to be true from obviously talking to you, but also just from our experiences, they thought they knew what the book was about. Right? Like they thought like, okay, well, I live this world. I know what you want. And they will tell you things that they think are super important to you. Oh, you're writing about, let me tell you about this element of it because it's super duper important. And this element is super duper important. But that's not what you're writing about,
Right. Yeah, it's true in both directions. Like the things that they think are not that important are really important to me as a storyteller. And a lot of things that they think are really important are completely unimportant to me as a storyteller, and so, a lot of the like kind of inner logistics of how dog shows work. I had to kind of learn all that stuff just to understand what they were talking about, but it didn't matter to me in the least.
Right.
And so, it was about the people and the relationships and the how they dealt with the dogs day to day and all that sort of thing. And so the inner workings of their lives, a lot of the day-to-day stuff that they had to accomplish and understand in order to be professionals in that world meant very little to me. And that was part of how I filtered out the people who were going to be important in the book and the people who weren't, were the people who understood that I was looking for something deeper.
Yeah.
Like Laura King, the handler, ends up being kind of the main human in the book. She understood right away that I was writing about dog shows, but not really.
Yeah.
And so that was a level of insight she had that I think some of the other people I talked to, who were very nice, knowledgeable, lovely
Sure.
people, I wasn't able to, part of this I feel like is my fault too. I'm not able to like explain to them well enough what I'm shooting for, and they weren't able to understand it well enough to express it to me.
But also, as you've said, I mean, so much is, it's that iceberg thing. So much of this is below the surface that you have to know in order to write about it with any kind of, I wouldn't even say expertise, because obviously that's true, but to write about it in a natural way that it like uses the language that they use and uses the rhythms that they use. You have to know it. Now you don't flaunt it. That's not what the book is about. But if you're going to write about this world, you have to understand this world. And so I always thought, like, I really felt this when I wrote my book about Houdini and I was writing about magic. I needed to know what was in this world. I needed to understand it, but it didn't make the book, right? Like, it wasn't a part of the book, but it was, right? Because unless I knew it and unless I understood it, I couldn't write about it. That makes sense.
Everything you learn informs what actually is in there.
Right.
And it gives it, I think that is, not just for regular readers, but I think that's very important when it comes to people who know this world who read the book, that they can read it and say, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. He may not have written the same book I would have written, but at least he understands what we do.
Absolutely. And also it helps you talk to them as well,
Sure.
right? I mean, like that's a key. All right, we're gonna bring this to a close, but before we do, I'm going to ask you something that I've seen people ask you at. We've done a couple of events together. I've seen you at a couple of events, and somebody always asks you, I think. So what did you find out? Are dogs happy? Right. I'm not going to ask you that because that is the essence of the book. But what I am going to ask you is now. So the book has been out for a year and a half, about
over a year. Yeah, it came out April of last year.
Yeah, it just came out in paperback in April. And so it's been out for a little more than a year. You've done a million, of these and a million events and all of that. Now, when you look at this book, Dogland, and somebody says, "Oh, tell me what it's about," like what do you think it's about? Because I find that, like, when I think about Why We Love Baseball or the Baseball 100, like, my view of what it means to people and what it's about has evolved some. It's still the same book, but that feeling about it has evolved. So this book starts with Why Are Dogs Happy? What is this book about in your mind?
Well, part of it, I think, one way to look at it is that it is about happiness and, how we find it, how dogs give it to us, what they get out of it, all that sort of thing. But I think maybe on another way to think about it, and a way that I feel like maybe is really important in the times we're living in, is that it's about connection.
Yeah.
So, a human being and a dog, if you love your dog, you have this sort of mystical connection with this creature that you don't understand their language. They don't understand your language, but somehow you have this bond that sort of goes beyond words and beyond probably emotions that you can describe. Right. And, we feel that way with other people too.
Sure.
But with pets, and I think with dogs especially, we feel this profound connection in a time, I think, when so many things in the world conspire to make us disconnected, when we are, and the connections that we often have are shallow. it's harder and harder to like maintain friendships. It's harder and harder for families to stay together. It's harder and harder for us to feel like we could talk to strangers
Yeah,
because there's so many things that divide us now. And every conversation with a stranger can feel like a minefield,
absolutely.
And so there's all these things that argue against making these deeper connections in our world. But they've never been more important.
Right.
And they've never mattered more. And they've mattered since the beginning of time. But right now, it feels like we have to maintain those to stay sane and to stay, to have some sort of deeper, meaningful relationship with the outside world. So I think that this relationship that we have with dogs could teach us some things about connecting with the larger world that I hope we don't just limit to dogs.
Yeah.
That we take outside and use it in our relationships. One of the many, many great things about dogs is that they're great social lubricants, right? If you take your dog for a walk, you're going to run into somebody else with a dog or somebody who wants to pet your dog or whatever. And you have this sort of low stakes, happy conversation that it turns out, like you're talking about how the little things mean a lot. It turns out that having a lot of those little kind of meaningless conversations during your day adds up to something really meaningful.
Yeah.
Right. And dogs help us make those little connections with people. And so that to me, if I want to look at like the real cosmic thing of what the book is about, it's about how we connect with other living creatures, how to do it, how dogs have figured that out, and how we can learn from them how to keep those connections going at a time when it really matters.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely true. All right. I said that was the last question, but the actual last question. I wore this shirt just for you.
Krypto, yes.
Krypto. We got Krypto here, my second favorite dog behind Wesley. Obviously, dogs in movies. You have a fun little section in there about dogs in shows and movies that I again will not give away. But how great is it that they brought Krypto back to Superman? I mean, seriously.
I mean, I think, why did they not have him in all the other ones?
It's unbelievable.
It's
unbelievable.
I know you have talked at length about how you feel like Superman, just as a general movie character, has sort of gone so far astray from what he should have been. But I think, again, it's humanizing, right? It's humanizing this invincible character who I think people may have a hard time relating to because he's basically can do anything. And one way to humanize any creature is to give him a dog. Yeah. This, of course, is the entire animating, the inciting incident, as they say, in the John Wick movies.
That's right.
Like, why does he come out of retirement? Because they kill his freaking dog, and he ends up killing 400 and something people because they kill his dog. A little out of proportion, but understandable.
But I think most people would tell you not out of proportion. There's no proportion.
No proportion. That's true. That's true. But it's an obvious way that movies and books and everything have done forever. If you want to make the character a little more human, you give them a dog.
Yeah.
And so and if you really want to scare people, you put the dog in danger. Right. And so all those things, I mean, that speaks to, nobody really thinks to do that with a cat.
No. No.
And so it speaks to that connection that they have with us and how meaningful it is and how much people care.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your point is 100% right. It's them not having Krypto in any of the movies beforehand is like what a misjudgment that was. I mean, this is you have an actual dog in the comics. There's a dog, and he's a super dog.
A super dog, yes.
It's Krypto, for crying out loud.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I haven't seen like the last 5 of the 47 Superman movies
No,
or whatever. But
you miss nothing.
I still think of Christopher Reeve as Superman.
Sure.
But I am intrigued by this new one.
You'll see it. You will go see it.
Yes,
It's
I'll go see the new one.
It's the best. It's the best. All right. Our guest, Tommy Tomlinson, his book Dogland, still available everywhere you buy books. Obviously, we always would love for you to support your local bookstore. You can go to bookshop.org if you don't have a local bookstore or you just want to support independent books. But it's available at all the big places as well. And thanks for joining us.
Oh, man, it's my pleasure. This was great.